I'm not an expert. I'm not a guru. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I don't say this every week, but maybe this is one of those, like, you know, take what I have to say today with a grain of salt. Episode 949 of DizRuns Radio is a quick tip episode. Today's quick tip: why salt matters. So today, talking about salt, which wasn't necessarily on my radar as far as something to talk about, but there were a few questions last month, if you remember, in the Q&A episode, which I say last month, in the order of the shows, it was a week ago. You know, it was episode 947 was May's listener Q&A episode, and there were a couple of questions about salt and salty sweating and replacing salts and things like that. And it just kind of, you know, I just kind of thought that maybe it was something that was worth diving into a little bit more, talking about it a little more in depth, because, you know, in the Q&A sometimes the context isn't all there, or the nuance isn't all there. And also just this week when I was having my weekly call with my other running coach friends, Laura and Nora, the ladies that were on the Mastermind episode earlier this year as well. I guess maybe it was at the end of last year. Whatever. You heard them both on the show not too long ago. We were talking about salt and some athletes that are a little bit nervous about taking in too much salt because of, I think, and maybe this is me reading into the question or the conversation a little bit much, you know, from what we talked about, but some of the stigmas that are out there as far as, you know, salt is bad and too much salt can create all kinds of health problems and yada, yada, yada. And while I'm not saying that is not entirely accurate, thinking that there's, I think what I am saying is that maybe there's a little bit overhype on some of the dangers of salt consumption. And I suppose this is probably as good a spot as any where I say, I'm not an expert, I'm not a guru, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor. I don't say this every week, but maybe this is one of those, like, you know, take what I have to say today with a grain of salt. And, you know, this is for educational or entertainment purposes only. Consult your medical advisor before adding, subtracting salt to your diet, blah, 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 blah. Moral of the story, don't sue me, because all you're going to get is, you know, like $14, a little bit of Patreon money, and a 7-year-old computer. Like, that's pretty much all my assets, so it's not worth the hassle. But, you know, just in case, there's your disclaimer. So, the idea today is let's talk a little bit about salt, kind of why it's important, and maybe some things to keep in mind, some considerations, not just through the summer, when maybe it's a little bit more top of mind, but even some things to think about year-round as it relates to our bodies, salt, running, all of the above. So the fact of the matter is that salts in their different forms, and I'm, you know, kind of going to, for the most part, my shorthand is probably going to be just calling it salt. But we're talking about all the different electrolytes, different minerals, vitamins, and not so much vitamins, but the different, you know, sodium, potassium, calcium. Those are kind of the big ones in our body. But what roles do they play? And ultimately, ultimately they play a lot of roles. Okay, there's a lot of things going on. Salt is super vital, super important. But for us as runners, and at least for the kind of the focus of today's conversation, or today's what I want to say monotone, but that's not right. But there's not really a conversation, because I'm the only one talking. Soliloquy, that wasn't the word I was going for, but we'll go with it. You know, the maybe the biggest thing that we're focused on as runners is that salt is vital for muscle contractions. Okay, if we don't have the right concentration of different salts in our tissues, our muscles aren't going to fire, aren't going to contract, aren't going to relax in the way that we need them to run. Because as much as maybe we think that running is pretty simple, and I mean really it kind of is, right? We put one foot in front of the other, and that's kind of all there is to it. At the cellular level, at the muscular level, like, it is a very intricate, complicated dance with spot-on choreography. And as soon as any of those contractions and relaxations fail to happen at the right time, that's when things go sideways. That's when things, you know, maybe cramping, probably the most likely scenario, but also just like muscles not doing what you're expecting them to do, feeling really awkward, all things going sideways that aren't ideal. Not always related to salt issues, but very well could. So, you know, if we're going to run, we're going to be successful with our running goals, making sure that our bodies are able to maintain the right balance of salt within the tissue is kind of important. Okay? So how do we do that? Well, thankfully, we don't have to really do it very much at a think about it level. All right, we'll get to a little bit of it here in a minute. But the way that our bodies work, again, incredible machines. Like, our bodies are really just ridiculous how complicated and how well they function, how smoothly things go. But inside of our bodies, ultimately what our bodies desire most, just about more than anything else, is no change. They like homeostasis. They like to find their balance and stay there. And one of the areas that our bodies like to keep in balance is the salt concentration within the internal environment. And there's a whole host of mechanisms from the brain to the kidneys and everything in between that goes into helping to maintain that balance of salts within our cells, within our bloodstream, within our tissues, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe the biggest one, maybe the one that plays the most role is our kidneys, or are our kidneys. Okay? So as your body starts to feel like, hey, maybe we're getting a little bit dehydrated, which means that the volume of liquid in our body is starting to go down, which means that then the amount of concentration of salt in our body is starting to go up, or the percentage is starting to go up because less water, salt staying the same, starts to go up. Our kidneys automatically start to, as they're creating urine, which they basically do 24 hours a day anyway, they create a more concentrated urine. They help to excrete more salt to keep that balance within our bodies equal. We start drinking a lot of water. You're drinking your 8 cups of water a day, or your 100 ounces a day, or whatever you feel like is the magic number for you. Just trying to maintain that clear urine situation, so you can be like, oh, hell yeah, I'm hydrated. When that's the case, and our bodies are like, whoa, there's plenty of fluids in here. Actually, the percentage of salt is starting to go down a little bit. That's when your kidneys start to kick in and produce more urine, more volume of urine, but a lower concentration of salt in the urine. It dilutes it more because it's trying to get more water out of the system to keep the salt concentration within the system where we want it to be. So all that to say, our bodies are really good at regulating the amount of salt in our bodies, the concentration of salt within our bodies, provided that we're putting enough salt in. Because as majestic and mysterious and incredible as our bodies are, one thing that they can't do is just create salts from scratch, right? We need to intake, we need to ingest, we need some salt in various forms or from various different types of sources in order for our body to then have the amount of salt that it needs. If we take in too much, pretty good at getting rid of it. If we don't take in enough, we have a problem because we can't create it. Okay? So that's where, and again, this is me offering just my take, my not uninformed, because I do yes, I do some research on these types of things, not just right before, but I've been doing some reading, some listening, some kind of refreshing on salts and things like that, and just how our bodies operate anyway. And so I might have a decent informed opinion, but I'm not the expert. So again, take what I've got to say, and make your own choices. But I really do think that for the most part, unless we have some type of medical condition, unless you're under direction from your doctor to say you really do need to limit your sodium intake, if you're not in that situation, for the most part, it's hard to take in too much salt to where it really becomes problematic. Because to get a whole lot of salt in, there's a whole taste factor that we have to go through. We'll talk about this a little bit more as we go. But, depending on what you're eating and the amount of salt you have to put in to get to danger levels, that's hard to do. And B, again, if you step over the line a little bit, our bodies just filter it out. That's part of what our bodies do. So the concern of taking in too much salt is, again, in my opinion, it's kind of overblown. Can it happen? Sure. Is it likely to happen? Probably not. And is it worth the risk of not taking in enough salt, which can lead to problems, hyponatremia being a big one, which again is just a dilution in the amount of salts within the body, the concentration is too low, and that causes problems not just for us as runners, but just like serious health problems in general, to the point where you can die from it if your salt concentration plummets too low. Okay, so it's serious. I think that we're better off erring on the side of adding a little bit more salt to the diet than maybe what we actually need. Okay, again, that's my opinion for myself. Take it for what it's worth. But where I get where I get my knickers in a bunch, if you will, is the idea from the USDA that, or maybe it's the FDA, whatever, from one of the A's, that there's a certain limit to how much sodium or how much salt we should take in per day. Because clearly we're all different, right? And we all have different needs, right? And, the idea of one-size-fits-all dietary advice is about as useless to me as one-size-fits-all training plan advice. As in, it's not worth anything at all. Sure, maybe there's some generic guideline. But to think that everybody's going to have the same requirements is basically laughable as far as I'm concerned. Because just think of the simple factors, right? How much do you sweat when you go for a run? Right? If we're running in the same conditions, we're running side by side on Saturday, we're getting our long run in, we're talking, we're chatting, we're having a good time. I guarantee you, I guess I don't, there's like a point something % chance. So more than likely, the volume of sweat that I'm going to lose during that run and the volume of sweat that you're going to lose during that run, probably not the same. Okay? So right off the bat, how much we're losing, how much salt we're losing, pretty much probably is not going to be the same there. Also, let's not forget about the concentration of our sweat, right? I might be a real salty sweater, you might not be, or vice versa. So all of a sudden, we've got differences in how much we sweat, the volume of the sweat we lose. We also have a difference, more than likely, in how much salt is in the amount of sweat that we use. So if you're a salty sweater and a high volume sweater, you're going to probably need to be like mainlining salt all day, especially if you run a lot, because there's another factor. How much are we training? If you're running twice as much as I am, odds are you're going to need more salt in your diet to maintain the appropriate levels of salt in your system, because you're training more, you're sweating more, even if you don't sweat more in isolation, but grand total here. So again, stop. In general, I would say, don't worry as much about the one whatever, however many milligrams of salt or whatever the recommended guidelines are from the FDA these days. I wouldn't worry about them because they don't really apply to your specific situation. All right. Another consideration when it comes to how much salt do you need? What's your diet like? Kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but different types of diets or different types of foods have different salt content in them to begin with. Rule of thumb, more processed foods tend to have more salts in them, more salt added to them. It's part of the processing procedure. Certainly that's part of the preservative, making them shelf-stable procedure. You think about things like, canned vegetables. Well, it's vegetables aren't salty by nature. No, but they're in the can. They're shelf-stable. They're preserved. They've got salt in them. Look at the can. They've got salt in them. Okay? I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying don't neglect to think about that. Cheese. It's another food that a lot of people would consider pretty healthy. Also pretty salty. Now, again, you get into even more processed foods, breads and pastas and cakes and cookies and various other, things from the internal aisles of the supermarket. You probably have a lot of salt in your diet already. So maybe you don't need to worry too much about adding a whole lot of extra salt to the mix. If you eat relatively clean, eat a lot of real food, a lot of fresh stuff, veggies, fruits, things like that, you might actually need to be pretty heavy-handed with the salt shaker because your diet doesn't have a lot of salt coming into it already. Today isn't the discussion for whether one of those types of diet plans is better than the other or different types of food, which is better, which is not. Just saying something to think about if you think, well, gosh, maybe I need to add a bunch of salt, but you're eating relatively lots of processed foods, maybe you don't. All right? So just something to think about. Do I need to add salt? Do I not? And if you're eating mostly non-processed food, yeah, you probably do. All right? Last but not least thing to consider when it comes to should I, shouldn't I, how much do I need to, I don't know. When in doubt, trust your body. When in doubt, trust your body. Our bodies are pretty good at telling us what's up. Bodies are pretty good at telling us what we need. We are not often good at listening and trusting what our body's telling us. We second guess ourselves a lot. Okay? Not ideal. So, not that these are like tried and true symptoms, but if you finish a run, especially in the summertime when it's hot, you sweat a lot, you finish a run and you're maybe more tired than you should be, a bit lethargic, maybe a headache, kind of just feeling off for a while post-run. Could be that you overheated, which is a factor in the heat, but it could also be that your salts are down, that your salt concentration is out of whack, and your body's trying to catch back up, maybe trying to get out a bunch of water to bring your salt concentration back up, whatever the case might be. If that's what you're feeling, and you start to notice that pattern emerge, maybe try adding a little bit of salt to the mix. I had Andy Blow on the show back in January, which was a terrible time to talk to a sweat scientist. It was in January. But that's how it fell, so that's what worked. But episode 906, if you want to check it out. But we talked about this very thing, and I shared then, and I think I might have shared in the Q&A last week, that I finally noticed that I was always having a headache after my long runs, and I started adding more salt to my water bottle, which I already add salt into it to begin with, but I started adding more salt to my water bottles when I'd go for my long runs, so that I was just adding more salt to the mix on those 2 and 3 hour runs that I was taking, and when I would do that, the headaches went away. Finish my run, sure I'd be tired, sure I'd be thirsty and all of the things that you would expect, but I wouldn't have this lingering headache for the next 8 hours. Because I put more salt in, kept my salt levels where they needed to be, bada boom, bada bam, felt better. And sure enough, I can always tell these days where if I'm not heavy enough on the salt shaker when I'm putting my water bottle together, I end up with a headache. Oh, God. Finish my run 2 hours. I got this low level headache behind me. Oh, maybe I should grab something that's got a little salty snack this morning that I wouldn't normally have, but I need the salt. Boom, good to go. So trust what your body learn what signs and symptoms might be, and if you're feeling off and it's consistently off when you're having some sweaty runs, maybe try adding a little bit more salt to the mix. What about during a run? Again, we talked to Andy that different, depending on how much you sweat, how salty your sweat is, you may need to add more, you may need to add less. But the other thing to think about is to kind of just add a little bit of salt on the daily, right? If you're going into your long run a little bit depleted because you haven't been adding salt during the week, it might not matter how much salt you take in during your run, you might have some problems. Because again, this time of year, whether you're in Florida, Texas, New Hampshire, Montana, anywhere in between, it's a little bit warmer than it is probably most of the rest of the time of year, right? And so we're sweating more just on the daily. We're sweating more when we walk from the car to the in the parking lot to the grocery store, to the office, walking back. You're sweating more when you take the dog for a walk. If you don't have air conditioning, which is not something that most of us have to deal with in Florida, of course, but my parents don't have air conditioning at their house in Michigan. Imagine probably some of you that live various northern climes maybe don't have air conditioning in some of those older houses either. You might sweat a fair bit at night while you're sleeping or while you're sitting on the couch watching TV. Maybe not as much as when you're running, but all those are little instances where you're losing salt throughout the week. And if you're not being conscious to reintroduce the salt to the system, you may struggle after your longer runs. You might be fine during some of your shorter runs because you're not losing enough to really notice it. But then you get to that long run, that 2 hour, 3 hour long run on the weekend, and you're struggling. All signs that you might be, needing to add a little bit more salt to the mix. And again, not just during your runs does it matter, but all the time. So, I don't know what the point is. I do know what the point is today. Try to help you think about salt a little bit differently, and maybe not think of it as such the boogeyman that sometimes we want it, or sometimes different outlets have made it to be in the past. Ultimately, it's your call. It's your body. You got to do what you think is right. Consult with your physician, of course. But assuming pretty good health, assuming that you're not in any reasons that you need to be super conscientious of your salt, I say for me at least, I'm going to err on the side of a little bit more salt to the mix. Because when I do, I just tend to feel better, both in running and in daily life. So something to think about. Tell me where I'm right. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where I missed the mark completely. At DizRuns on Twitter. At DizRuns on Instagram. You can also shoot me an email to DizRuns@gmail.com. Of course, you can leave a comment on the blog post today down at the bottom of DizRuns.com/949. Or if you're watching this on YouTube and you made it all the way to the end, or even if you didn't make it all the way to the end, but you're watching this on YouTube or listen to this on YouTube, you can leave comments and feedback in the YouTube comment section as well. Happy to interact with you. Happy to answer your questions, or at least try to answer your questions. Again, this isn't an area of my optimal expertise, but some things I've learned along the way, hopefully give you a little bit of information that you can take and do with it as you please. So there we go. One more time, thanks to Suzanne and everybody that's been on board or is currently on board the Patreon train. Appreciate y'all. Appreciate your continued support. Patreon.com/DizRuns if you're so inclined. Would love to welcome you. There's always room for more on the Patreon train. And I guess that's where we'll wrap this one up. Not super quick today, but hopefully somewhat useful. Not super quick, I guess, is the standard these days. But anyway, until next time, y'all, please be well. Take good care. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk soon, all right? See you.